We welcome you to another Sunday school lesson. People must face decisions that will change their lives forever. Rebekah became the wife of Isaac to play an important role in the unfolding of God's promises. In today's text, Abraham and his family are in the midst of a major transition. Sarah, aged 127 years old, died. Abraham is now 140 years old, and is living in Canaan among pagans. His greatest concern is to find a wife for his son Isaac before he dies. This is to fulfill God's covenant promise to bless Abraham with many offspring. He commissions a loyal servant in his house to go to his homeland Haran to find Isaac a wife. The servant takes with him 10 camels and other goods as dowry, which was the custom in ancient Eastern countries. He journeys to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor, and reaches the outskirts of the village. Our lesson starts with Genesis 24 verse 12, which says, "Then he prayed, 'Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today, and show kindness to my master Abraham.'" Armed with this assurance and in a faithful obedience to his master's request, the servant sets out to fulfill his master's orders. He and his camels set down to rest near a well in the evening when the women usually came to draw water. There, Abraham's servant prays to God for success and guidance in his mission. He acknowledges that he can do nothing without God. The servant is confident that the same God who had been faithful to his master will lead him. He asks that God grant him success in his undertaking. His success would mean a show of God's goodness and mercy to his master Abraham. Verse 13 says, "See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water." Sitting by the well, believing in the promises of God and trusting in his providence to guide him, the servant continues his prayer. It was time for the women to come and draw water from the well. It would not be unusual for women to offer water to weary travelers. The culture and hospitality of the day demanded such service. Verse 14 says, "May it be that when I say to a young woman, 'Please let down your jar that I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I'll water your camels too,' let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." The servant's request here is unique and specific. It is not only whether the young woman would offer him water to drink, but that she would also offer water to his camels. He is not looking for just any woman for his master, rather he wants the one who God would choose. He is not giving God a condition or dictating to him, but is demonstrating his total trust in the Lord's ability to work wonders. Many young women usually came to the well at this time of the day. But to avoid making the wrong choice, the servant makes an unusual request, the offer to give water to his camels. He wanted a woman with an attitude of service for his master, one willing to go the extra mile. He needed a woman with the right heart, so he asked for God's help because seeing hearts is God's specialty. Again, the answer to this unusual request would confirm that God has shown kindness to Abraham. Verse 15 says, "Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor." As he was speaking and had barely finished praying, the Lord had providentially already answered his prayer. This sets the tone, urgency, and speed with which God answered his prayer. The idea here is that while he is still praying, God has already answered his request, which is consistent with God's character and promise. Everything the servant asked for, the Lord answered, and even better. Of all the ladies who would come to the well that evening, the Lord's choice for Isaac was the first, with every detailed specification Abraham had ordered and precisely what the servant had prayed. By divine providence, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, shows up. Verse 16 says, "The woman was very beautiful, a virgin, no man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar and came up again." Often God answers our prayers beyond our expectation. Although the servant never asked for a physically beautiful young lady for his master, God went beyond his request. He brought to him a woman who was physically, as well as morally, beautiful. Although she is old enough to marry, Rebekah has kept her purity. Her chastity is emphasized twice. She is a virgin and neither had any man ever slept with her. In ancient times, virginity was a highly sought-after quality in Jewish culture. Families looked for young women with such moral upbringing for a wife. Just as the servant had requested, a woman arrives, carrying a water pitcher on her shoulder. Immediately, without taking notice of the man at the well, she goes down and fills her pitcher with water. Carrying her water-filled pitcher, the girl comes up to go home, as she routinely must have done for years. But today, unknown to her, her life is about to change for good. Verse 17 says, "The servant hurried to meet her and said, 'Please give me a little water from your jar.' As she returns with her water-filled jar, the servant runs to meet her and asks for a drink of water. Verse 18 says, 'Drink, my lord,' she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. Without hesitation Rebekah grants his request. Verse 19 says, after she had given him a drink, she said, 'I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink.' Without hesitation Rebekah grants his request, exactly the sign the servant had proposed to God. It is not an easy task to quench the thirst of a dehydrated camel, much less 10 camels. Camels often feed and drink water to last them for over a week's journey. A thirsty camel would drink almost 40 gallons at a time. It would take more than 400 gallons of water and many trips up and down to satisfy the camel's thirst. Water jars were usually large and heavy. The servant definitely is aware of how tedious and almost impossible this task would be when he asked for the sign from God. Fulfilling this unusual and difficult sign would unequivocally assure the servant of God's will. Verse 20 says, "So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels." Rebekah now quickly goes to work. She would need to go several times to draw water to fill the trough until all the camels had enough to drink. This is hospitality to the highest degree, caring for a stranger and his animals, and doing it freely and cheerfully is the wonder of it all. Without knowing, Rebekah was by providence not only the instrument by which God fulfilled the servant's proposed sign, she was indeed the answer to his prayer and the desire of his master. She gives him drink and offers her services for his camels, the very sign the servant proposed. Verse 21 says, without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. Meanwhile, the servant watches with keen interest as Rebekah goes several times up and down from the well drawing water for the thirsty animals. Apparently she is accustomed to this type of work. Even after this show of hospitality, the servant has to make sure Abraham's terms had been fulfilled. He probably wanted to be definitely sure that Rebekah was the person God has chosen. Each trip meant that Rebekah carried about 5 gallons of water one way. A gallon of water weighs about 8 pounds and Rebekah was carrying 40 pounds each time. Each trip would take anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes, assuming there was no line to wait in. Rebekah made at least 90 trips to the well. At 3 minutes per trip, this comes to a grand total of 270 minutes. Rebekah invested 4.5 hours doing this task. In the next verses 22 to 60, the servant hears Rebekah's lineage and gives her many expensive gifts, a golden earring of half a shekel weight, and 2 bracelets for her hands of 10 shekels weight of gold. He asks whether there is room for him and his entourage at her home. Rebekah welcomes him and takes him to her family. The servant narrates fully how his master, Abraham, had requested him to go back to his roots to find a wife for his son. He also relates in great detail how the Lord providentially guided him to their house. He asks for Rebekah's hand in marriage for his master's son, Isaac. The family obliges. Nonetheless, Rebekah makes the final decision. Genesis 24 verse 61 says, "Then Rebekah and her attendants got ready and mounted the camels and went back with the man." So the servant took Rebekah and left. With the family's blessings, Rebekah and her maids, and the servant with his entourage left Mesopotamia for Hebron. It was a journey of about 450 miles on camels' backs and about a month's travel time. Rebekah's drawing water is a display of humility and service. Indeed, she seemed to delight in serving. Verse 62 says, Now Isaac had come from Beer-lahai-roi, for he was living in the Negev. Verses 61 and 62 occur simultaneously. While Rebekah and her group with the servant were on their way, Isaac came up from the south country along the way of the well Lahai-roi. At this time Isaac was living on his own, in the southern region of Hebron, anticipating the return of the servant with good news to establish his own family. The mention of the well Lahai-roi is significant to Isaac because of its meaning. The well got this name when God miraculously provided for the pregnant Hagar when she fled from Sarai's bitterness. God protected and provided for Hagar and Ishmael even though he was not the son of promise. Verse 63 says, He went out to the field one evening to meditate, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Like his father Abraham, Isaac is a man of prayer. Both must have been in prayer awaiting the return of the servant with good news, a wife. It was evening time. Isaac went to the field via the well Lahai-roi to meditate. He appears to know the value of meditation. As he was about to settle down for his meditation, he saw the camels coming. This was a familiar group of camels. He was able to recognize them from afar. Verse 64 says, Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel. Almost simultaneously Rebekah lifted her eyes and saw Isaac coming toward them. Verse 65 says, And asked the servant, Who is that man in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. She inquired who was approaching the caravan. After learning from the servant that it was Isaac, she quickly dismounted from the camel to meet him. As an act of respect and submission, she took a veil and covered herself as was the custom when a bride meets her bridegroom. When she met Isaac and realized who he was, Rebekah was gentle and humble. She didn't complain about the tedious journey or the difficulty of leaving her family to come to a strange place. Realizing God's providence at work, she cheerfully accepted her new relations. Verse 66 says, Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. After introducing the couple, the servant then recounted the journey in detail to Isaac. Our last verse states, Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Isaac then took Rebekah into his late mother's house. They became husband and wife. He loved her and she became a consolation to him for the death of his mother. Let us hold fast to these life lessons from Rebekah. 1. Giving leads to higher levels of blessings. Rebekah was rewarded because she gave more than needed. The only thing that Abraham's servant asked was a drink of water for himself. Rebekah went above and beyond the request and she offered to water the camels as well. The thing that most people forget is that it takes higher levels of effort to reach higher levels of blessing. 2. Be willing to go the second mile. One of the biggest issues of our society is that very few actually go the extra mile in anything. There are people who refuse to go the extra mile in their work. Couples refuse to go the extra mile in their relationships. Parents do not go the extra mile with their children. Students refuse to go the extra mile in their studies. The reality is that there is so much unused potential in society and in the church, that we fail often because we seldom give our all. 3. Service leads to significance. Rebekah made the choice to serve others that day. She invested her time, her effort, and her compassion. Little did she know that her service would change her life. Rebekah is remembered because she rose above and beyond to lift others up. The same is true of everyone here today. God wants to use you in His plan to save the world. Your role may not seem significant to you, but in the hands of God, everything we do matters. Our lesson next week is entitled, Siblings Rivalry. Our biblical reference is Genesis 25:19-34. We are truly glad you spent time to learn this week's lesson with us. We hope you are blessed and may share these with somebody else. We wish you can join us at the Cubao Church of Christ soon. Our congregation is a place to discover faith, find new friends, grow closer relationship with Christ and serve with each other's gifts. Thank you very much, have a great week, and God bless you always, dear brothers and sisters.